New today, Democrats holding more town halls across the country to foster party unity and address voter anger over President Trump and Elon Musk's slashing of federal programs. Voters also furious over Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's decision to back a Republican funding bill. We'll hear a Schumer today.
Look, I'm not stepping down. And let me just say this, Kristen. I knew when I cast my vote against against the government shutdown that there'd be a lot of controversy, and there was. In my caucus, we have a disagreement as to, some people voted one way, some people voted the other, but we've all agreed to respect each other because each side saw why the other side felt so strongly about it. And our caucus is united in fighting Donald Trump every step of the way.
Well, back with me again, former Special Assistant and Director of Message Planning to President Biden, Megan Hayes, and Crooked Media VP of Political Strategy, Shaniqua McClendon. So, Shaniqua, should Schumer step aside, and who would fill that void? I mean, some say it could be AOC. Granted, she's in the House and he's in the Senate at this point, but philosophically at least.
Yeah, it is up to Chuck Schumer and his colleagues, his Democratic colleagues in the Senate, as to whether or not he steps down. But I do think we need someone in this moment who understands the moment that we're in. There's this pervasive thing in in politics in general, but especially on the Democratic side, where you have these older members who are really clinging to power, and then they don't use it. And I think that is why so many Democrats are upset right now. I hope Chuck Schumer, has, for lack of a better term, learned his lesson. He said he knew there was going to be controversy. I don't think people care about controversy. They feel like Democrats are not all on the same page as to whether or not they're going to fight. And, we will keep hearing that Democrats don't have majorities in the in the Congress, but governing power is not the only type of power that our leaders have. And I think we're seeing that as people are showing up around the country, Bernie Sanders, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, that there are other things that they could be doing. But the vote on the CR was actually a time that they did have some governing power and they didn't use it.
Do you think, Megan, that Democrats are mostly scapegoating Schumer because they feel powerless right now? I mean, do you see any opportunity in the party's current malaise to reimagine what it stands for and who will lead it?
I don't think they're scapegoating Schumer in the same way that some people think. I think that to vote to close down the government, you really need to figure out a way that you are going to reopen it. So they didn't really have any bargaining power. They had a false choice. So I understand what Schumer did. He made a tactical error, not a strategic error. But I do think it is time for new leadership in our party and to have a younger generation come in. So I do think he needs to do what Nancy Pelosi did in 21 and think of an off-ramp here for someone else to come in and take power. But I do think that there is more that they can do, just like Shaniqua was saying. Democrats need to be out in their communities. They need to be showing the American people what the Trump administration is doing and what these actions are actually doing and will do to their communities. So it's not that they have no power, they're not fighting, they're just not choosing to fight in a way that makes sense to people or that people are seeing.
Shaniqua, I'm curious because I want to get your thoughts on California Governor Gavin Newsom's new podcast, because in the first two episodes, he interviews right-wing provocateurs Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk, and that's infuriated many progressives. Newsom says he wants to engage with people who don't always agree with him in an attempt to win over new voters, young men in particular. Is this a better strategy? And then same question to you, Megan.
I do not think that anyone who already like Steve Bannon is going to somehow wake up and like Gavin Newsom just because Steve Bannon was on his podcast. I am not opposed to having people with opposing views be in conversation so that we can kind of listen through difference. But I don't think we should be bringing extremists onto our platforms. I mean, sorry, the clip you just showed of him smiling, it looks like he's friends with them. It looks like he's having a good time. And I don't think that this is helping him. I mean, I know he wants to run for president, but it seems as if he doesn't know he's going to have to get through a Democratic primary first. And so whoever he thinks he's winning over, they are not voting in our primary if they are people who would be attracted to him because he had, Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon on his show.
Okay. Megan, you can weigh in on this. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree here. I think that Newsom is also making some poor decisions here. You can get people on your podcast that disagree, that are not Steve Bannon or Charlie Kirk. And I do think that that's great that he wants to change some of his policies now and his views now because he wants to run for president and wants to moderate a little bit. But his policies in California don't support that. And his legislative agenda do not support where he is trying to go. So I think it's a little too late to be making these shifts. I don't think that people want someone who's disingenuous or inauthentic. I think we're seeing that of how Trump got reelected. So this isn't the way I would go about trying to run for president or trying to change my image. But I mean, to each his to own. But I agree, he does have to get through a Democratic primary, and this will not help him do that.
I am going to add, though, he had Tim Walz on this week, just so you guys both know. All right, Megan and Shaniqua, it's good to see you. Thank you.